Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today at Politico, at the CNN Political Grill, Chicago, for the Democratic National Convention. We have Governor Kathy Hochul. She is the 57th governor of New York State, but incidentally, only the first woman ever elected to that position. She has a history that you wouldn't believe, including having served in local office and in Congress as well. Now, New York isn't critical to the race for president or even the race for Senate and leadership there, but it is crucial to who controls the House next year, and you have a lot to do with that. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it. We do have President Joe Biden keynoting tonight on the stage at the United Center there at the convention. You are one of his staunchest supporters, a very vocal advocate and surrogate for him. You were with him till the end, ride or die. Can you tell me on that fateful Sunday how you learned the news that he was leaving the top of the ticket, who told you, and honestly how you felt, whether it was disappointment or relief? Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you this, and thank you for having me here today, Emily. I was in a remote part of the state of New York. A lot of people think it's all Manhattan, but I was up in the North Country speaking to labor unions, and there's not a lot of cell service. So I missed two important phone calls that day. One was from President Biden, and one was from Kamala Harris. So I got lovely voicemails from everybody, but I was really sad I couldn't pick up the phone at that critical point in both their lives. And it was a confluence of two emotions. You know, one is such a depth of appreciation for someone like Joe Biden, what he did in 3.5 years. Other presidents, it would take at least 2 terms to accomplish. I mean, he really packed in so many significant accomplishments. So I'm grateful for his friendship. We've always been close. He helped me in my election. He went to school at Syracuse University for law school. I went undergrad. He met his first wife in Syracuse. So when we were up there talking about Micron, he went and met her family. So we've had a good connection. And just both of us coming from blue collar roots and appreciating union workers, and we're both Irish, we became very close. But when I heard it was going to be Kamala Harris, I also knew that there was this little opening, right? It wasn't cemented for her immediately. And I wanted her to know that I would have her back, even when others might have been looking around, is there an opening? What's going to happen? Because the same thing happened to me. I was number 2, all of a sudden number 1, and that's when the sharks start coming out, right? Let's see if we smell some blood here. And I made sure I did the same thing that Kamala Harris is. You lean into it. This is yours. You've learned the job. You've been there ready to step up. And I was so impressed with how everybody galvanized around her. And she demanded it, she deserved it, and she got it. So emotions were just roller coaster, but my gosh, we're in a wonderful place. And the energy here is just off the charts, off the charts.
In that gap you're talking about where Kamala Harris wasn't quite the presumptive nominee yet, what happened in that space? Did you have regrets about being so staunchly behind Biden? I mean, your lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado, actually was a part of the chorus that said that he should step down, that it was his time to go.
No, I said it was up to Joe Biden when he wanted to do it. Once he decided to do it, we move on to Kamala. I mean, that was not difficult for me. So what I also saw was there's an opportunity for New York Democrats to step up in the breach there. When others were thinking about, who might, others, we'll never really know what people were thinking, but it wasn't clear from the very first second that it was going to be her. So I pulled together, I did a Zoom call with all the New York State delegates. I said, this is who we want, we support her. And within a day, we were able to deliver the New York State delegation in support of her. As others were starting to line up, everybody started following suit. And certainly President Biden's support for her was instrumental. So it was kind of a wave of activity over a very intense, compacted time frame. And here we are.
What do you believe will be President Biden's legacy?
There's so much. If I had to look at it from New York State, he brought us back from the pandemic. We were the epicenter of the pandemic. We had a president who failed to properly even acknowledge the severity of it. I mean, he was out there blaming China and doing all sorts of crazy things, not understanding that there were literally people dying in the streets of New York. Didn't seem to care at all. I was just at Elmhurst Hospital. That was ground zero. That was where you saw the body bags being stacked up outside the hospital. There literally last week. he did not have a clue as what was happening in this country. Joe Biden took care of the pandemic, gave us the leadership we needed, but also New York State, the infrastructure projects. What he has done with the Gateway Tunnel, other projects that he's helping us fund, the 2nd Avenue subway, we're working on Penn Station. We're doing so much. And he got them all started. They had been jammed up because Donald Trump was never going to help New York State. Never, never, never. And the other issue is his CHIPS and Science Act, that is transforming our state forever.
Right.
Unbelievable what's happening with Micron and the fact that there'll be 50,000 jobs in upstate New York in Syracuse. So that's a story that never, ever would have happened but for Joe Biden being president and putting a top priority on leading us into the innovation phase of semiconductors, weaning us from the reliance on foreign-made chips that shut us down when we couldn't get them through our ports just a couple years ago. So making it in America is great. Making it in New York is even better.
You brought up Micron in Syracuse. You brought up Syracuse University earlier, so I'll just take a beat and say that I went there as well. So I am an alumna of Syracuse University as well. If President Biden's legacy includes infrastructure, what would it look like in terms of federal funding for infrastructure for mass transit for New York under a Donald Trump presidency?
You had to say that. I was having such a nice time. I can't fathom this. I really can't, because the Gateway Tunnel, for example, is something that has to happen. I mean, you cannot shut down this lifeline for the northeastern corridor, and it was damaged during Superstorm Sandy back in 2012 when I was in Congress. And there was no money coming at the time. If you recall, that's when Republicans said no money for states like New York unless there's an offset in the budget. So that's what happens when Republicans are in charge. They don't go help you. There's a price that's extracted. So the Gateway Tunnel is years behind. You had Chris Christie say no. My predecessor didn't make it happen. He had a hostile president with Donald Trump. So we finally, everything lined up. The stars lined up for that. So will they line up again with the Trump president? I wouldn't hold my breath.
And the reason I ask about that is there is a scheme in New York State, it's very crucial to New Yorkers at large, but also House races up and down the ballot impacts, and that's congestion pricing, which is charging drivers who enter Manhattan $5. You've placed it on an indefinite pause. I wonder what that would look like under a Harris presidency, under a Trump presidency.
That was going to be a $15 charge for New Yorkers coming into Manhattan. We put it on a pause because, in my opinion, we have to look out for everyday New Yorkers. $15 was too much at that time. So we are in a temporary pause. We've also said my commitment is to continue all the funding for infrastructure projects, including commitments from the White House that the 2nd Avenue subway, for example, will continue. So I feel confident that they will. But when you mentioned those House races, that is what I wake up thinking about, and the last thing I think about at night when I go to bed is how we're going to win back the House of Representatives. I mentioned this morning in my remarks to the New York delegation, we're very certain that we will go for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz for president. So other battleground states, we're supporting them. We want them to be successful. We know that's where that game is. But the House of Representatives is so instrumental to the success of President Harris that you don't have one of the houses in Congress that's dead set on stopping everything you try to do. That's how it was with President Obama when he had John Boehner in the House of Representatives in Republican hands, and that's when I was in Congress. We wasted time, 43 times they told us to vote on whether or not we should repeal the Affordable Care Act. My Republican district wanted me to repeal it. I refused, and that's why I'm a former member of Congress, but I'm okay with that right now. But that's the kind of thing, they just play games. There's nothing meaningful that happened during that entire time. President Obama could only get the Affordable Care Act in when Democrats were in charge of the House. So see the difference? I know we have to take back the House, and the path goes right through New York.
I'm curious to know when the pause on congestion pricing will end. Will it be after the elections then, after these crucial elections?
It's not related to elections. It's not related to elections. We're studying other options. We're looking at what has happened. Even a place like London, where they held up as the example of congestion pricing, they started at £5 and they worked their way up to the higher number over time. So I'm looking at all the options that we have on the table.
So you want to make adjustments before you settle on a date?
We will be announcing this by the end of the year because the legislature has to act on it. So there's more likely that it'll be announced at the end of the year, early next year, as we get the legislature on board. But I'm working with our leaders right now.
So these House races, we're talking about 6 battlegrounds in New York State that could well determine the path to whether Hakeem Jeffries or Mike Johnson is Speaker next year. When you ran for Congress, you didn't necessarily have help from the state party that a candidate might now. Can you tell me a little bit about the coordinated campaign, a little bit of what state Democrats are doing? And forgive me if I say that this is something I would hope that Democrats would have been doing all along.
Yes, well said. And they weren't, because the New York State Democratic Party was basically an appendage of the governor's campaign and was only really activated every 4 years when the governor needed it. I saw how detrimental that was when I was in local government. I've been an elected official for 30 years this year. Town council, county races, then Congress, then lieutenant governor. If we had had a really active, engaged party, we might not have ever had to be in this position where the local county committees are on their own. I mean, they're struggling. We have so many counties in New York that are not Democratic majority at all. I mean, there's some deep mega areas and a lot of Republican areas as well. I wanted to make sure, after I got zero help from the state party back when I needed it as a candidate that eventually won and changed the narrative about Democrats having to lose. This was right after the Tea Party ascended to power. And they didn't want to engage because if I lost, it would look like Democrats are continuing their slide downward. So I was pretty much ignored until I started going up in the polls and had a chance to win. And I went from definitely Republican seat to leaning Republican to toss up to I won it. And it was a short election. It was a special election. So I realized that I had the power now as governor to really reshape the state party. I raised into it nonstop. I started last year. I said 2024 is too late to start building the infrastructure. We started last year giving money to county committees, helping them with little races for town board and winning DA's races in Republican areas that we never would have. These county chairs are so grateful. They have a governor who's lived their experience, knows what it's like to be a Democrat in Republican territory and how hard it is to recruit volunteers. So we're funding them. We're giving them the organization they need. And we have over 100 volunteers hired by us through the coordinated campaign that we're doing with Hakeem Jeffries and Kirsten Gillibrand. We're great partners in this. 35 field offices. I was just with John Avalon in District 1 and Laura Gillen and Pat Riley talked. We are putting boots on the ground and venues that they never had before. What that allows the candidates to do, use the money to go on the airwaves. I pick up those local costs. They don't have to worry about it. So this is the power of the state Democratic Party that I've known was there. It was never utilized, and I've turned it around just in the last year and a half.
Is this New York Democrats' way of pushing back at some of the districts and corners of the state that are purple, reddening? Politico has done some reporting, my colleagues on New York Playbook, about how in a couple years' time, New York could be a battleground, not the blue state that it is now.
There's a lot of changing dynamics. Long Island, it goes back and forth. I mean, you think about Al D'Amato, had this powerhouse when he was senator, or where he came from as supervisor. There's some very large organizations, very large active Republican organizations throughout Long Island and the Hudson Valley. So we ignore them at our own peril. Just assuming that there'll be enough Democrats in New York City to offset anything Republicans do is
Don't
naive.
take it for granted.
Do never take it for granted. Always run like an underdog. And that's what I've always done. So I say this, half the votes come from New York City, the other half come from outside New York City. We better be paying a lot of attention to those areas, letting them know who Democrats are, what we stand for, that the majority of Democrats in the state of New York are right up the middle, centrist ideas, progressive hearts, but fiscally more conservative. That's who Democrats in the majority of New York State are. We have to speak to those voters and bring them back. We've not walked from them. We have not walked away from them. We need to persuade them that we still fight for them. Fight for our farmers, fight for our children, fight for our education programs, fight for everything that has always been associated with Democrats but has been taken away by narratives that the Republicans have constructed that we're the extremists. No, we're the ones with good hearts. We take care of people. We give people a lift up, a hand up when they need it. And we have to get back the independence as well.
Right.
This year is that opportunity. When they see the candidates we have running for Congress, all thoughtful, smart, experienced people, and the money behind them, that's how we're going to start pulling people over, as well as, I would say, suburban women, Republican women. We'll get them back on reproductive freedoms, because this is no longer a threat that these rights could be gone, like people were saying in 2016. Those rights are gone for 1 out of 3 American women. Our country's in peril when it comes to providing reproductive health for women. And we're sitting in New York feeling comfortable because we have a governor that is going to go to the mat to protect those rights. But anything can happen.
Yeah.
And they need to never take that for granted either.
No, let's talk about Kamala Harris, the vice president and the nominee for president of your party. This is your party getting another shot at getting the first woman president elected. I see a lot of parallels between her ascent and yours, especially this notion that you came to power because your predecessor, a male, fell from grace. It's a different situation with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, but she ascended because a man vacated his spot, so to speak. Is that the only way that women can get to where someone like you are, or do we need to build a better base? What does it take?
I don't think it's the only way, because Hillary Clinton is also the example. She was an established senator from the state of New York. She was a hard-working senator who earned her reputation as a real workhorse. Then she became the Secretary of State, global experience. So I don't think anyone could question her credentials in her own right. And she was our nominee back in 2016. She won the primaries. She got there fair and square. So I just want to point out that Kamala Harris got there a certain way. I got there a certain way. But there are other great examples of strong people like Hillary Clinton who were able to break down the challenges. Now, after Kamala Harris is elected and likely reelected, I want children born today, or my little 2-year-old granddaughter, to go through life thinking, gee, do you think we'll ever have a man president? Let's turn this around. Let's turn this around. And so we can do that. This is going to create a narrative that it's normalized now, that we're finally catching up with India and Ireland and England and all the countless countries around the world, Australia. It's depressing to think about it. But she is the breakthrough person who can let people know a woman can win, can be successful. It'll bring out a lot more women who want to run for office, because it is a tough business. It's tough. But that's not an excuse.
Right.
Women are tough anyhow. We deal with everything that's thrown at us in life, and the extra challenges of having that little more scrutiny that women get in all positions, but particularly in politics. We break through that. We can show it's not that hard, because if we don't step up and represent other women and speak for them, then who will? Who will?
What challenges do you see ahead for Harris, regardless of gender? She is stuck in a place now where the vibes are there. Everyone in the Democratic Party is feeling really good, and there's a politics of joy about it, and enthusiasm, cautious optimism. But she hasn't detailed a lot of her platform. She's kept it vague. Maybe she doesn't have to. It's just that reporters and the press want her to. Is this going to be a problem for her when she starts to do interviews, when she does the debates?
This is a binary choice. Hold up Kamala Harris to Donald Trump. Is he being criticized because he hasn't put forth an actual policy on anything that's going to work? I mean, so let's be fair. Let's not say, well, we're going to make her have to have, a 500-point plan on the economy, and she better know every part of it for the next interview. Oh, over here, Donald Trump can do whatever he wants. He's kind of crazy anyhow. Let's make sure that the coverage of her and him are fair. That's my first request, because, this whole idea of substantial equivalency, that if the press criticizes Donald Trump on something, they have to find something just as bad to elevate to the same level for Kamala. Let's not go there. Let's not do that. Let's be honest in our assessment. Donald Trump is not an unknown commodity. Is not someone that we're going to find out is willing to instigate an insurrection, for example, or is willing to stack the Supreme Court in such a way that literally the rights that my mother fought for, that I took for granted, that my daughter who's with me no longer has, the right to an abortion in many of our states, we don't have to wonder if that'll happen under Donald Trump. It already happened. This is like part 2. This is the Trump travesty part 2. We've seen part 1. So I think all I'm asking for is fair analysis of her the way Donald Trump is being analyzed.
Right.
And I'm looking to see that, because that is something it's the responsibility of journalism. I believe in mainstream media, the sources of information that are credible. Check the facts and everything that
You don't think they're being fairly covered now?
No, I just want to make sure that you ask what the threats are. My concern is that people get their information about Kamala Harris from other sources.
Okay.
I grew up, you learned journalism at Syracuse. The way we're taught is that you check sources, you make sure you have there's a protocol to continue to protect the integrity of journalism. I'm old enough to remember watching Walter Cronkite, and I trusted everything that came out of his mouth. My worry is that people are getting their news from TikTok and YouTube, and this is what scares me, that they'll create a caricature, some messaging, or even AI, deep fakes. How are people supposed to know if there's a deep fake image of Kamala Harris, or is it real? Literally in the state of New York, we're having literacy training, media literacy training in our schools. I want to start this so our students can determine fact from fiction when they're digesting various news sources, because they're not all getting it from legitimate sources. And that's a real concern of mine. So that could be something that takes hold in a campaign like this, that legitimate press has to be watching for and help people understand what the truth is. That's the only thing, because she's got the right message, she's the right person, she's got the right energy at this time, she picked the right lieutenant or the vice president. The momentum is going there. It's August. In one sense, it's a sprint, not a marathon, which is great. But we also saw what happened. We've seen other elections where things happen in October.
Right. Let me ask it this way, and it's interesting that you bring up social media and TikTok and such, because I find that is where she is getting a lot of her support and generating this enthusiasm and this organic movement by young people in the party who are excited about her. But in coming months, what issue would you like to hear more from her about?
Just talk about families, just talk about the struggles that people are going through right now. They didn't ask for the pandemic. They didn't ask for inflation to eat away at their wages. They're still trying to get their heads above water. Just go talk about that. Donald Trump can't touch that topic. He has no clue what it's like to worry about childcare, paying the bills and the groceries. He's so out of touch. Let that be a contrast, because people are looking for someone who's like, she understands me. She gets me. She's not this faraway person. And they're going to say she's this, West Coast lefty liberal, all this. Like, give me a break. She was a prosecutor. She was a district attorney. She chose to go into a profession where she could use her talents and her intellect and her education to stop people from harming others. She went into that by design. That is a tough, tough business. And to be steeled the way you must be to be a district attorney of a major city is something that people ought to understand. She's out there fighting for people to protect them, protect their homes, their families, their businesses, protect lives. Let's lean into that story as well. I think that's powerful, because parents and family, they're hardwired to protect their kids. This is why I talk about public safety every week. There's something I'm doing on public safety, because that's my #1 job, is to protect the safety of New Yorkers. She should lean into that experience as well, would be my humble advice. But just talk about how you're there to protect families. You're there to protect their income, protect their wages, protect their workplace, protect their homes, protect their streets, protect their ability to take care of their kids. Let's lean into that. I think that's something that could be be inspiring for voters.
I got you. In the time that we have left, let's talk about someone that you served in Congress with. And actually, the region you're from, Buffalo, is actually as close to Midwest as it is to New York City, and that's Tim Walz. Will you tell us something we may not know about him, this is someone who cannot be caricatured as a West Coast liberal or a coastal elite at all, because he is the different thing.
I don't have any inside secrets about Tim Walz, but we were on the same floor, the 7th floor of the Longworth building. Now, he was one of the survivors. What I mean by that is this seemed to be the floor where everybody who was kind of vulnerable was put. I just saw Russ Carnahan on the street. He was on the floor with me. He lost his seat in Missouri. Alan West lost, but that's fine. There's a handful of, it's funny that I lost my seat. A handful of us in there, in that whole area lost, and he was one of the, we call him our survivor. And I stayed in touch with him over the years. He's just, what you see is what you get. On the floor of the House, he was friendly, slapped you on the back, sit down next to you, how's it going? He's so genuine, and that's what America needs right now. They're tired of just all the fake politicians that are out there, and people like Donald Trump. I mean, come on, we don't know who we're going to get on any day of the week. Are we going to get someone who's, anyway, I'm not going there. I have too much to say about Donald Trump.
We'll hear more about that tonight.
I got my list.
I got my list. Remarks,
but he's a good
front and center.
He's a good, genuine person, and that's a connection that people are seeing and relating to, and young people in all ages are saying, you know what, he's a regular guy. He doesn't think he's better than the rest of us. And I think that's a little bit of the Midwestern sentimentality. Like, we're just, you come from Buffalo, like, you don't think you're better than anybody else. We're all here. We're all fighting it. We're all struggling. You start out, my parents lived in a trailer park. We used to buy our clothes at used clothing stores. But you know what? This country's great.
Right.
Look at the opportunities I have. Tim Walz and Kamala Harris have great stories to tell as well. And then I got this reacquainted with Tim again as governors. And he's the head of our Democratic Governor Association, so I see him all the time. And he really is the happy warrior in the legacy of Hubert Humphrey and Al Smith from New York.
Right. On that note, we look forward to hearing your remarks tonight, and we'll be listening, and we thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Governor Kathy Hochul of New York.